Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, who's ready for the UCI Road World Championships? I'll be looking at the form guide with a look back at the European Championships and the Grand Prix of Quebec and Montreal, amongst other races. Plus, is the World Champs course as hard as we've been told it is? I'm not sure it is. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that Mark Hirschi is on fire. He's now won his last 5 races, all of them one days, on the trot. More on that later on. We also learnt that having 2 sprint trained in a single team is it's an interesting choice, but one that worked out quite well for Belgium at the European Championships. And finally, we learnt that Tadej Pogacar is back. After almost 8 weeks away from racing since his Tour de France win back in July, Pogacar was back competing at the Grand Prix of Quebec and Montreal last week. And whilst the first of those didn't quite go to plan, the second did. Last night, Pogacar was back to doing the extraordinary things that we're used to seeing him doing, i.e. riding away from everyone at will and soloing to victory at huge races. An ominous sign, really, ahead of the World Championships in Zurich that has almost exactly the same amount of elevation gain as the Grand Prix Montreal, albeit in a race that will be around 60 k's longer than it was yesterday. So how much can we look into that as a form guide? Quite a lot, I would say personally. Pogacar has often taken a little longer to find his legs again after his post-Tour de France break, but he's clearly trained well and he's clearly very focused on the possibility of making history at the World Champs this year, which are now under 2 weeks away. If he does win there in Zurich, he'll become only the 3rd rider in history to complete cycling's Triple Crown. Only Stephen Roche and Eddie Merckx have won the Giro, the Tour and the World Championships in a single season. Now, there were a lot of big riders who will be hoping to do well at the World Championships who weren't present and weren't competing in Canada last week. But that said, it doesn't make Pogacar's performance much less impressive. He basically advertised what he was going to do. There was no surprise to it, no tactical cat and mouse. His team set the pace on the front, gradually upping it as the race went on, until Pogacar felt it was the right time to go. Matteo Jorgensen of Visma Lease Bike was on his wheel as he went, but there was nothing that he or anybody else could do about it. I guess the one positive that the other riders could take away is that he didn't continue to increase the gap. There was a point where it sort of stalled as they started the work behind, and when Pello Bilbao of Bahrain Victorious went off in pursuit, it wasn't like Pogacar put minutes into him over that last 15 k's. His margin at the finish was 24 seconds, although by that point he'd sat up to celebrate the 85th win of his career. Bilbao held on for 2nd place on the day. Alaphilippe took an encouraging 3rd in winning the group sprint from behind. 2 days earlier at the Grand Prix Quebec, UAE and Pogacar had tried to do the same thing, but on a course that's not quite as selective, so it didn't lead to the same result. At one point though, on the final lap, he was clear with 3 riders from Lotto Destiny in a group of 4, including Arnaud Delis. But they were caught and then sort of swamped just before the finish line. Michael Matthews of Jayco Alula took what was their biggest one-day success of 2024. He quite comfortably got the better of Biniam Girmay of Intermarché in 2nd and surprised Rudy Mollard of Groupama FDJ in 3rd. Matthews subsequently dedicated the win to his grandmother, whose funeral took place whilst he was away in Canada. Now, it's hard to know how much we can take from the Grand Prix Quebec in terms of world's form. There is significantly less climbing in Quebec versus the World Championships, but at the same time, a not dissimilar amount of climbing per kilometre of racing. In fact, I'm starting to wonder if the World Championships course in Zurich is quite as selective as we were led to believe. Yes, it is hard, but it's certainly nothing like the World Champs in Austria back in 2018. And neither were the Europeans, which took place in Belgium over last week. So maybe there's even less that we can take from the men's race there when it comes to predicting World Championships form, but I'm still going to try. And the most impressive rides yesterday from a strength point of view came from Mads Pedersen of Denmark and Mathieu van der Poel of the Netherlands. Both of them were particularly active through the middle part of the race, sort of determined to try and break Italy, who were the team most intent on working for a bunch sprint. which they were successful in doing. They really rode out of their skins yesterday, the squadra Azzurra, but unfortunately Jonathan Milan should I say, was less successful in finishing it off at the end. So just like last week at the BMSC Classics in Germany, he found himself boxed in and unable to actually launch his sprint. And he's going to have to be careful that that doesn't happen to him too often. There can't be many things more frustrating than crossing the finish line having been unable to give everything you've got in the sprint. In contrast, though, to Jonathan Milan, we have Tim Merlier, who often finds himself a little bit further back, but crucially, with room to get out and do his sprint. And that's exactly what happened yesterday in Belgium, where even after help from Bert van Leeuwenberger, he seemingly came from nowhere at twice the speed of everybody else. Olaf Kooi of the Netherlands was also very impressive, so he came from completely the opposite side of the road and pretty much matched Merlier's pace once he'd got onto the wheel of the Belgian. Poor Jasper Philipsen, though, who'd had his own dedicated lead out in the Belgian team, didn't even get a medal at the end of the day. Madis Michels of Estonia pipped him to the bronze medal at the line. The race, incidentally, was ridden at an average speed of over 48 kilometres per hour, that's over 30 miles per hour, helped in parts to the fairly flat parcours. So the win there doesn't propel Tim Merlier to the top of the favourites list for the World Championships. He's not even doing it, it's far too hilly for him. But on the other hand, we did get to see that Van der Poel and Pedersen have clearly been training very hard of late in preparation for late season goals. And you'd have to imagine that the World Championships is a big late season goal for both of them. Personally, I thought it was going to be far too hilly for either of them this year. But having had a closer look at the route, I'm now not too sure about that. I still think it's on the limit for them, but certainly not impossible. Anyway, we'll have the full World Championships preview out for you later this week, with all the details on the courses for the road race and time trials, plus the main favourites taking part in all of them. For the women's, our form guide is going to have to come from the Tour de Romandie, really, because like the men's race, the European champs ended up in a big bunch sprint. And whenever there is a sprint in women's professional cycling, it's really no surprise to see Lorena Wiebes pop out to take a convincing win. That is exactly what happened on Saturday afternoon in Belgium, where she had a lead out from her Dutch teammate before then deciding to jump ship, in effect, over to the Italian train near the finish and launch her sprint from that. And if I'm honest, I think if we're all honest, she made it look incredibly easy. Nobody else was even close to her. And it means that the Dutch have now won the 6 Women's European Championships on the trot over the last 6 years and only lost it once in the last 8. Like I say though, probably not the best indicator for the World Championships, given the significant difference in the parcours and the elevation gain. But with the way that Wiebes has been going this season on the climbs, I think she could go quite deep into the race this year in Zurich. I don't think she'll win it, but I also don't think she'll be getting dropped like a stone on lap 1. Now, the 2 favourites for the women's elite race in Zurich this year have got to be Wiebes' 2 trade teammates, so Demi Vollering and Lotte Kopecky of the Netherlands and Belgium respectively. Again, with the way that Kopecky is climbing this year, of late in Romandie of course, and with the sprint she's got at the end of a hard race, she's going to be very difficult to beat again this year. But the World is one of the few big races that Vollering has yet to conquer, so you'd imagine she'll be looking at this as her best opportunity yet. The person I would like to see win the most, though, Grace Brown of Australia. I mean, how amazing would it be to finish your career with the win at the Olympics in a time trial and the road race at the Worlds? That would be quite something, and I personally think it's a great course for her. Hilly enough without being mountainous, and with some flat stretches where she can make her trademark long-range attacks. She's definitely going to be one to watch, and you can't give her an inch. Right, back to the men's race briefly, and one of the intriguing aspects to the men's race will be the dynamic between Tadej Pogacar and his teammate Primož Roglič. They're both representing Slovenia in the road race. Now, given Pogacar's recent form in one day, to say recent, I mean over the last year or two, he's won 4 of the last 6 one-day races he started and 8 of the last 16, you'd forgive him for expecting to have most of the Slovenian team support him. But then you've got Roglič. He hasn't raced as many one-day races over the past couple of seasons. In fact, I was looking earlier and his last one was almost a year ago. But at the same time, he's won quite a few big ones in the past, hasn't he? So it'll be very interesting to see how they play that balancing act in the Slovenian squad a week on Sunday. Anyway, let me know your favourites for the World's Road Race titles. I'll be reading all the comments that you leave under this video before we record our big preview of the races in a couple of days' time. So is Pogacar the nailed-on favourite? Are we overestimating him or underestimating others? Let me know. And also let me know your thoughts on Lotte Kopecky. Will she double up this year? Right, back to the Europeans now. And there was a bit of an upset in the men's individual time trial. So it had been almost 5 years to the day since Eduardo Affini had taken his last pro win. But last week in Belgium, he rode the time trial of his life, blitzing around the second half of the course to take the biggest win of his career so far. And it meant that Stefan Kung of Switzerland had to settle for second on the day, with Catania giving Italy 2 podium places. Incidentally, Alex Segart's winning time in the under-23 race to win for Belgium there would have been enough for him to win the elite title. Now, of course, it may well have been that conditions changed throughout the day, but that must still make him wonder. In the women's event, Lotte Kopecky put almost 3/4 of a minute into Ellen van Dijk of the Netherlands in second, with Christina Schweinberger taking the bronze for Switzerland. Now, if you missed out on any of the action of the racing at the European Champs last week, you can catch up on Discovery Plus or Max, where you'll be able to watch a full season of bike racing live or on demand. Believe it or not, cyclocross season is just around the corner as well. In fact, there's already been some smaller races. Meanwhile, down in Italy, there was a pretty good week for Mark Hirschi of UAE Team Emirates. So this time last week, I was sat here telling you about his win at the Gran Premio Industria e Artigianato, but he's raced twice since then and won twice since. On Thursday, that was at the Coppa Sabatini, so he attacked on the hardest climb on the circuit with a whopping 36 k's to go, never to be seen again. Then 2 days later, he was at the Memorial Marco Pantani, winning in very different style, this time out sprinting a group of around 20 riders. There were 10 Italians, incidentally, in the top 12 on the day, but Hirschi spoiled their party by taking the top spot. As mentioned at the top of the show, that meant that he's raised his arms aloft victorious at the last 5 races that he started. And I can't think of anyone else who's recently even come close to that. If I'm wrong, you can obviously let me know in the comment section just down below. Hirschi didn't race yesterday at the Trofeo Matteotti, and so we had a different winner, of course. Aulius Aular of Cajarural was that man, getting the better of Alessandro Covi and Alexei Lutsenko in what was a small group sprint to decide the win. Arvid de Klein took Tudor Pro Cycling's 11th win of the year at the Grand Prix Isberg in France, where Micah Bogart took a very popular win in the women's race. Eleonora Gasparini won in the Grand Prix Stuttgart in Germany, where Kat Ferguson ruined her only finishing on the podium at every single race this season record, finishing a lowly 7th on the day. I jest, of course. A reminder that she's actually still a junior rider, but currently competing in professional level races. And just lastly, before I get on to transfers for this week, Mathieu Burgodeau won 2 stages and the overall classification at the Tour of Istanbul in Turkey last week. Right then, I will end the show with all the latest transfer news, starting with what I think is the biggest one of the last week, and that is that Oya Lascano is leaving Movistar and heading to Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe from 2025, which feels like a huge blow to Movistar, doesn't it? Lascano is Spanish and started to become a force to be reckoned with, not just in the classics, but in stage races too. He was top 10 at the Dauphiné this year. And it must be a bit of a kick in the teeth for them that they haven't been able to keep him. On the flip side, it's a bit of a coup for Red Bull, where Lascano will hook up with the Van Dijk twins and Lawrence Pithy in what looks to be a promising young classics lineup. After a single year with Team DSM Firmenich post-NL, Emils Leopins is already on the move, so he'll be at Q36.5 next year, whilst Visma Lease Bike have snapped up Martina Fidanza from Serra Tizit Pro Cycling. Marta Lack is one of the very few people that Team SD Works Pro Time have confirmed as signing. She's inked a 3-year deal with that team starting next year. And just finally, some staff news. Magnus Bagstedt has left Canyon SRAM as a sports director and is looking for opportunities at other teams. Comes as a bit of a surprise in some respects, but then again Dan Benson had already reported on Bagstedt removing himself from the Tour de France due to a conflict with the team's management over the tactics at that race, which they won of course with Kasia Niewiadoma. In other news, the Astana Kazakhstan development team have fired Ilkin Dostiev after doping controls revealed evidence of the blood booster Serra being in his body. Sera is a drug that stimulates the production of EPO, which in turn boosts red blood cell count, making it easier for the body to transport oxygen to the muscles. Sera was quite big back in the early 2000s, but I can't remember the last time someone tested positive for it, until now of course. Dostiev had won a stage and finished second overall this year at the Giro Ciclista de la Val d'Aoste de Mont Blanc. He's a well-respected stage racer. Unfortunately, it looks like his career is probably going to come to an end very prematurely, as it should do. Right, that is all for this week, but don't forget our World Champs preview will be up towards the end of this week. And I'll also be back this coming Monday to look at the Tour de Luxembourg, Grand Prix de Wallonie, Championship van Vlaanderen and the Super 8 Classic. So I'll see you then.